Hello everyone. In this video I'll go over what it took me to vinyl wrap my entire car with no previous experience. First things first, the wrap I chose was Avery Dennison's Satin Carmine Red. I chose this because it was the closest color to my car's original paint and I did not want issues that come with vinyl color changing. I also heard that Avery was easy to work with, which turned out to be true. The roll I bought was 65 foot long, but after multiple failed pieces I ended up finishing basically the entire roll. Keep in mind that for some panels I had to redo 2 or 3 times, so if you are not a beginner, you could get away with a lot less. If you look closely, you can probably tell that the front quarter panel and the door have slightly different shades. The door is about half a year newer than the panel, and so there is a bit of sun damage that changed the color, and it seems that the ceramic coat I applied has some dust trapped in it. If we go back here, you might be able to notice a few bumps on the vinyl. This is because it was wrapped outdoors. Normally, lots of preparation is done to make sure that there is no dust or debris in any crevices, but it's basically impossible to avoid these bumps unless you have a clean indoor space. From a few feet away, it's not noticeable, which is good enough for me considering the state of this car's original paint. Now I'll cover some tips on wrapping this car. Starting with the front bumper, since there is a big curve at the bottom, it needs a lot of stretching in order to not bunch up. This effect is less pronounced than the rear, but if you are watching this, you are likely not a professional, so you may be okay with making relief cuts at the bottom. Another method for this is to maybe make the bottom quarter or so of the bumper a separate piece, which may improve your results. You should also remove the side marker lights, which is held up by just 2 nuts, accessible from the wheel well, as tucking in the vinyl with those installed is pretty difficult. This piece on the license plate cover is probably the easiest to do, and it's just some generic eBay carbon fiber. That's an extra horsepower right there. Moving on to the hood, it's a lot easier if you can get someone to help you stretch the entire piece before laying it down so you don't get any accidental bunch-ups. The 2 windshield washer nozzles are pretty easy to remove if you open up the hood and unclip them. As for the inside corner, it's a bit sharp, so you might have a bit of difficulty tucking in the vinyl inside this corner. So just to keep it in place, I use this glue that I found online, which does a really good job of holding it in place. For the quarter panel, you might notice there's going to be a lot of wasted vinyl when you rough cut the general shape. So what you could do is tessellate the front and rear vinyl pieces together in order to save some vinyl. For the windshield frame, it makes a gigantic C shape, so if this was to be done in one piece, you would waste a lot of vinyl in the center here. You could either save the inside piece for trim pieces, or you could install 3 narrow strips of vinyl and then connect them using knifeless tape or something like this. That's my preferred method, which is a pretty big no-no in the pro industry, which is cutting on the car. In my case, I don't care because the paint is in a bad shape anyways. This method works really well for spontaneous repairs where you're not normally able to sneak in knifeless tape into the area. Now for the door, I'd recommend removing the inside trim to access both the door handle and the mirror. Removing both makes it a lot easier to work with. For the door handle, it requires a minimum of 2 pieces, as doing it with one and stretching it will result in peeling in hot weather, especially around here. I've done this in 2 pieces. For the door itself, it's pretty easy to remove the trim near the window and then tuck the vinyl in there. This corner I found a bit of difficulty working with, so I just made some relief cuts and used the glue to make sure that it does not peel later on. I find myself always forgetting to clean the inside edges that I'm tucking away the vinyl in, but the glue is pretty good at sticking to it. As for the mirror, this also needs to be done in 2 pieces, otherwise it requires an extreme amount of stretching that would not hold under hot weather. Over here is where I cut off the first piece and then used a strip of vinyl on the inside to sort of snag the top piece and make sure it stayed in place. For the bottom portion, it was a bit difficult to do, so what I did was I got some masking tape and wrapped it around it, and then trimmed along the edges so that when I unfolded it, I got a perfect template which I just copied over to my vinyl. Down here, this piece is pretty easy to do, but my car had some rough undercoating that did not look good, so I sanded it down until it was smooth. The undercoating on my car is present on all the quarter panels and these pieces down here. Vinyl does not stick well to the substance, so I had to use some glue on the inside edge, and they're holding up till now. There's also these plastic clips down here which do help to keep the vinyl in place. For the rear panel, I chose this inside edge of the door to trim along this line. When it comes to color changing wraps, this would be a big problem. It may potentially be seen from the outside, but because I chose the same color, there isn't much of a difference that would look weird when you open the door. In this particular case, that was some spray paint, but you get the idea. For the fuel door, I found a nice method to do this, where you get a piece of vinyl and use some heat to stretch it in all directions. Then you use a knife to cut on the inside edge of the quarter panel, and then you tuck away the flap into the fuel door. Then apply some heat and it will shrink over the edge. For these three pieces back here, it's a lot easier to just remove the bolt and then wrap it by itself, since there are some small edges present on it. I did a quick time lapse on Instagram of how I did this, but it's up to you to figure out how much detail you want. The rear hood was a bit tricky just because of the grille. I recommend removing the rear tail light to allow you to tuck in the edges better, but for the grille it's not as easy as just cutting out an outline of these long ovals. If you did that, you would see the obvious color change and then the white edge from the vinyl. So what I did was I cut some relief flaps and then used heat to stretch the pieces inside out and then have them grip on the metal flaps of the grille. I used a lot of glue to hold them in place, but there may be a better method than this. For the rear bumper, it was a lot more difficult to do just because of the amount of curvature present at the bottom. For these corners, I wasn't able to stretch it enough, so I ended up making a lot of relief cuts. This piece at the top could be done individually, but you might be fine doing it all in one piece. But this inside edge with the grille definitely needs to be done as a separate piece. This is because with the amount of curvature it needs, it will peel in the hot weather. The same goes for these edges at the taillight and this inside edge of these trim pieces. For these trim pieces, I did them in two pieces, but you could probably get away with one. You just really don't want to overstretch them. Over here, I just glued some foam plastic so I can hide these see-through spaces. Now, looking from afar, it does kind of remind me of something. Never mind. So far, the best way I found to join two pieces together that isn't knifeless tape is to overlap them, then cut halfway in between the two edges, and then peel the extras from both sides. This way you can join end to end and not leave behind any ugly bumps. The biggest thing to look out for is if the original piece is stretched, it may retract under heat and you'll see some of the original paint underneath. So you have to make sure that it has a neutral tension before you attempt to repair a section from it. From far away, of course, this isn't a problem, but this isn't really something you would do on a client car. Now onto the spoiler. With this particular one, I ended up using 3 separate pieces as these curves were quite a bit complex. This spoiler is the Connex spoiler from the brand LuxuryPart based in Thailand. When I first ordered this piece, I noticed that there were a few cracks, which I would have blamed on shipping, but I noticed that the actual spoiler was made of very thin, chopped matte fiberglass. I personally don't think that this is a suitable material for a spoiler, as it has to endure lots of bumps on the road. So I asked the maker to add an additional layer of woven fiberglass, which would add lots of structural support. So far it's been really durable and did not weigh much more than initial weight. I would definitely ask him to add a layer of woven fiberglass on the inside. One thing to mention is that with this particular height, it does block a bit of a rear view, but who cares when you're going faster than everyone else. Now I just want to quickly mention the suspension upgrade I did. I went from my original struts to Tein's Flex Z coilovers, and I've noticed an obvious improvement, especially because my rear shocks were gone and causing the car to bounce all over the place in corners. They're stiff, but they're not so stiff that it's uncomfortable on the road, and the adjustable ride height and damping is neat. I've lowered my car about 1.5 centimeters to avoid major bumps on the road. Lastly, I want to mention that if you are doing any body work on your car like I did, even the slightest imperfections will show greatly after you're done wrapping. Vinyl is very unforgiving and will amplify any bumps or dents that are left behind. So what I'd like to do is take a piece of scrap vinyl and apply it over the repaired area, and then look from a very shallow angle to make sure there's no visible imperfections. Now that I've finally done wrapping my car, I'll be focusing all my efforts on this gated shifter, which I've left alone for a while now. Who knows how long that's going to take. By the way, this cover is from stitchingcover.com. It's pretty good, but this top and bottom portion were too smooth, so I had to add these templates just to make it have a reasonable amount of grip, so be careful when you're choosing the material. Thanks for watching.